Well, I'm very happy to be able to do these review sessions. There's a tremendous amount of material to cover that Rinpoche explained, and so I am a little bit uneasy in the sense of that I might flood you with too much information. But if you are forewarned that there's a lot to cover, and it's quite dense material, then hopefully you'll be able to bear with it and take that. First thing that I'd like to explain, I should mention that among other things, I'm a Sanskrit scholar, and the old Serkong Rinpoche explained very much that it's important to milk the meaning, like milking a cow, out of the words. And so if we look at the original Sanskrit of these verses and of the technical terms, we get much, much more of the meaning of it. So in the verse that the chapter started with, which was quoting from another chapter, it had the word pratitya samutpada, dependent arising. And this is a very interesting word if you break it apart. Pratitya means something that arises first, something that has come first, literally. Prati is first, itya is come. And then samutpada means arise together with. And so this is this whole point of when you have dependently arisen things, that they arise from something that came first, and then they arise. Well, let me correct that because I'm confusing two things. Let's start again. Let's start. I'm trying to explain this in a way that makes order. There are two types of dependent arising. There is, then this is fallen. Then what I explained first will make more sense. I can hold the microphone if this is going to be awkward. I can hold it. Right. Laws of physics. Yes, cause and effect, dependent arising. Okay. There are two types of dependent arising. This is the way His Holiness the Dalai Lama explains it, that there is dependent arising in terms of cause and effect. And then from an effect arises dependent on a cause. And the two of them can't exist separately from each other. Something isn't a cause unless there is an effect of it. And something isn't an effect if it didn't come from a cause. So they arise dependently on each other. So that's a sequential type of dependent arising. And then there is a mutual dependent arising. And mutual means that two things mutually depend on each other. And it's not so much that one, well, it is, but it's in a different sense. So two things depend on each other. So for instance, the whole and the parts, that the two things come together and are mutual with each other. Long and short are relative to each other. Something isn't long by itself. It's only long in relationship to something else that is shorter. And then a category and a member of the category, like animals and a member of an animal's, a specific example of it. or a word and a meaning. Otherwise, it's just a sound. But a sound is given a meaning, and then it becomes a word. So word and meaning mutually arise with each other. Basis of mental labeling and the mental label, a similar type of thing. So these are all come under the category of a mutual dependent arising. So then, how do you know these things? So this is another word. And how you know something is in terms of, and this is this word, which is unfortunately translated as mental labeling, which is very confusing. Mental labeling, we should put that term aside. The Sanskrit word, prajnapti, means that prajna is discriminating awareness, what's usually translated as wisdom, but this is a factor that everybody has, including the worm. So to translate it as wisdom is a little bit misleading, too advanced. It adds certainty. The definition is that it adds certainty to the aggregate of distinguishing. Distinguishing, usually people translate it as recognition, but that's wrong, because that implies you knew it before and then you recognize it again. Distinguishing just means to distinguish this from that, to distinguish this form from the wall. That the way that you cognize things, that you see things or hear things, you have to distinguish something from the background. Otherwise, you're just seeing pixels. It has to sort of be together, colored shapes. So, and this adds certainty to that distinction. This is this word that's translated as wisdom, but actually it is discriminating awareness. So you discriminate, definitely this and that. And this word prajnapti means that it is something that causes you to be able to discriminate something. So this is the relation. You can only, and for example, I look at the front of, when I look at you, I look at the body of this person, or we look at the body of anybody, we only see part, don't we? So first you see part. So this is, what comes first in this dependent arising. First you see part, and then you see the two together. It arises together. So I see part, and even though I don't see the back of his head, I say I see him. I see the body. Or first I see the body, and then I say I see him. So the person. So I see him together with the body. So this is this word that's translated as imputation, which is not a very meaningful word in English. So you have several types of this. You have the type which is, for instance, a person and the aggregates. First you see, an aggregate, you see a body, or you hear a voice on the phone, and then you say, oh, I hear my friend. But first it's the voice, and then together with the voice, the friend. You see them, I see my friend. You think of them, I'm thinking of my friend. Something like that. This is something that can be known non-conceptually. I see you, I hear you on the phone. Then there is what's usually translated as mental labeling, which is completely different. That is would be better called conceptual labeling, not just mental. Conceptual means that when you have conceptual cognition, it is through a category. So the category could be, for instance, my mother. Now, what would fit into that category if I'm thinking of my mother would be all sorts of memories, images, or, memory of a voice or whatever, which represents my mother. That's the basis of labeling that it's my mother. So that's only when you're thinking or remembering or planning ahead. We think in terms of categories. Or an audio category. There's a sound category. Sound category, that's how language works. If you think about it, let's say the word apple. It's just a sound. Now, how is it that we're able to understand when we hear apple in a man's voice, a woman's voice, loud, soft, with an accent? We all hear it and understand it in terms of the sound category, that it all fits into the category of the sound of the word apple. That's how our language works. That's how we understand language. So that's what we mean when we say conceptual cognition. It's with a category, through a category, I should say, fitting things into a category. And the problem with that is that coming along with it is that it truly exists in a category, like in a box. And things don't exist that way in a box with a line around it, or in the dictionary. Here's the word, and designation is when you apply a name or a word to the category. That's designation. So when they say mere concept, mere words, that's what they're talking about. And what we're talking about, so in terms of dependent arising, when we're talking about how things exist, that also is not the way to think about it. That's not what the words are saying in Sanskrit or even in Tibetan. It's how do you establish or prove that something exists? That's what we're talking about. How do you know that something exists? Well, the lower tenets would say because it produces an effect. If it produces an effect, I know that it exists. Other schools will say, because it appears to me, it exists. I see it. Well, an appearance of true existence also appears to you. So that doesn't prove that it exists. So how do you establish that something exists? The only thing that you can say is that there's a category which society has, decided upon. It's a convention. It's called conventional truth. It's a convention. We've decided on that this group of sounds, apple, which are just sounds, meaningless sounds, we're going to, the cave people decided that this is going to be a word and it's going to mean something. It's going to represent these things over here. The greatest example, I think, is dog. How in the world all these different animals that look so different are all dogs? It's quite amazing. Whoever came up with that as the word Hund. You have a dachshund, you have a shepherd, you have a poodle. They look completely different. So, how do you establish that there is such a thing as a dog? Well, there's a word for it, and there are all these things that fit into this category of word, and that's all that you can say. Because you can't point to anything on the side of this animal that has, a name tag on it that says, I'm a dog. It's always good to give slightly silly examples because it sticks in your mind. Right, it goes bow wow. Right, have you ever heard a dog actually say bow wow? No. So, but when you say that things aren't established on their own side, this word nature, by nature, again, you have to look at the word. What the word means is that it is a self-establishing nature. Things have a, what you would say, a self-nature. In other words, and this is a very tricky word, because it's the same word. You have a defining characteristic, for example. If things didn't have a defining characteristic, you wouldn't be able to distinguish one thing from another. The mental factor of distinguishing takes as its object the defining characteristic. Now, the defining characteristic is just made up by a group of people. Example would be emotions. What in the world is an emotion? Love. Where is the border between I love you and I like you? When does it go from I like you to I love you? That's very, very individual, isn't it? They're just words. And so what establishes that there is such a thing as liking somebody and loving somebody? Well, it's just merely that there are words for it, concepts for it. That's all. There's nothing on the side of the emotions that says on this side of the line it's liking and on that side of the line it's loving. Is there? Nevertheless, there has to be some defining characteristic that you can know in yourself. You can distinguish that now I can say I love you. And that's a weird thing as well. If I say it, that makes it real. I mean, that's like Alice in Wonderland. If I say it 3 times, that makes it true. But we're like that, isn't that? We think that if, in order to, when you're insecure in a relationship, tell me that you love me. That establishes or proves that you love me. I mean, that's ridiculous, isn't it? And saying it just once is not enough. So that is, a very good example. So that to get back to this verse with which we started, that which arises together with what comes first. So, for instance, what came first was that I see form, the body, and then what arises together with that, now I see the body and the person. So that's dependent arising. Or I see this animal, and then I see, then I know I put it into the category of dog. So then dog together with this animal, or the word dog. So that's dependent arising, like that. So that is explained as voidness. Voidness means that things don't arise by their own power, by something on their side. It arises only because, how does it function? How does it arise? It arises because, how does a person arise? Well, first you see a part, and then you see, a person. Aggregates. A dead body is not a person. So again, the aggregates and the person, they have to come together like that. So that's explained as voidness. It's not established by itself on its own side, independently of a basis, independently of something that is known before, a part and then the whole. Or we only, you see a fruit, let's say an orange. What do you see? You see a round orange shape, a spherical orange shape. Well, you don't see the sound of, the smell of the orange or the taste of the orange or the feel of the orange in your hand. The orange is all of that, isn't it? But then we say, I see the orange. We don't say, I see a orange-colored ball. Like that. So there has to be something. So, I mean, it's very, very interesting, really. So that's, that which arises together with what has come before. So it's dependently arisen. Like that is explained as voidness. It can't arise by itself. And then the second line, that which is obtained is the word. That which is obtained from or derived from discriminating something else. Remember, I said that in order to be certain about something, let's say a person, you have to discriminate the basis. So it's known by something else, by means of, caused by knowing something else. That is explained as the middle way. That's the middle path, is the rest of the line. So middle between that it arises from nothing or that it just arises from one thing. So that's that first verse. May you ask a question? Of course. Rinpoche said to ask difficult questions is my punishment.
Maybe we take the microphone that they at home hear it too.
Yeah.
Thank you. It's just for clarification. So you translated from the original Sanskrit that what comes before. But what about the mutual dependency? That's not necessarily.
Well, mutual dependency, they long and short. First, you have to see a finger, and then you see. You could either see two fingers at the same time, but it would be that you see one finger, and then you see the two finger in comparison to each other. Then it's mutual. You see a part, and then you see a whole. So, like that. That's why I was saying it's a little bit awkward, because cause and effect also are mutual, but cause really comes, before in a different way. In a different way. Any other questions? Yeah. Yes.
Did I hear you say that the third level is non-conceptual?
Third level of
dependent arising?
No, I didn't say that.
Okay. So
no, what I said was that when you talk about the word imputation, you see the problem by only translating it as mental labeling or conceptual labeling is that we think that therefore everything is created by my imagination. And when you think that things are, the ways of existing, thinking that they are ways of existing, then makes you think that things exist only because I think of them. I mentally label them. I come up with a concept, whereas it's talking about how you establish the existence of something. So the point being that there are certain things that are imputation phenomenon or dependent phenomenon or phenomenon that arise that you know because of something else. There's no word for it in our languages. Some of them you can, like the whole and the part, you see non-conceptually. Person and the aggregates, it's non-conceptual. Other ones, like a category and what fits in the category, or word and its meaning, those are conceptual. So even though the mechanism is the same in both, that there is a something that is known first and then it causes you to know, the whole. The mechanism is the same. So then, by that, you can say, well, everything is, dependent arising from that point of view. Nevertheless, we tend to put that all, everything together, to not make the distinguishing. In the Sautrantika system, it's very clear, because they differentiate objective reality, objective phenomenon. So a person, the whole, the parts, so on. That's objective reality. And then what I translate as metaphysical truth are, concepts and categories and stuff like that. It's not objectively so. So there they make the distinction very clearly. And even though, that distinction is not made, with that terminology in the other tenet systems, it's very important to understand that. I mean, this is what Rinpoche was referring to on many, many levels. It's very important. You can't understand the so-called more higher views and higher tenet systems without understanding the basic ones. And as the old Serkong Rinpoche said, don't look down on them, and don't look down on the non-Buddhist views that the Buddhists were arguing with. These people weren't stupid. All of these views are internally consistent and explain everything, and are beneficial, help to lessen suffering. That's the whole purpose why Buddha taught these. So anyway, I want to go on, and I hope we don't have to finish exactly at 8:30, because Rinpoche covered a lot. Rinpoche brought up the topic of the 4 tenet systems definition of ignorance, and that this is something that we need to understand. There are also the levels of mental labeling as well, in terms of concepts, that also the levels of sophistication is very important to know, to understand. So when we talk about so-called ignorance, in general, I never liked that word because it implies in English that you're stupid. It's not that you're stupid, but there are 2 different types of, what should we say, ignorance. There is not knowing, which would be unawareness. You're just unaware, I just don't know. And then there is misknowing, which is knowing incorrectly. So there are 2 of these. And if we look at the Vaibhashikas define it as not knowing the, misknowing. They say it's misknowing the 4 Noble Truths. In other words, you know the 4 Noble Truths the way that the non-Buddhist schools define them. They all define the same thing. They all talk about suffering, the cause of suffering, which they say is ignorance of their view. They all talk about liberation, the cessation, which you get through correct understanding of their view. That's why Buddha called his, the 4 true, these are, we're talking about the same thing, but my version of it is true, is the true one, which of course all the others would say, well, our version is the true one, but nevertheless, this is the point, is that the topic of the 4 truths is not exclusively Buddhist. That's common to all the Buddhists, to all the Indian schools. They just have their own version of it. So the Vaibhashikas, the misknowing is misknowing the 4 Noble Truths, believing it in the way that these other schools take it. Because of that, they only assert that because they say that not knowing, which is what the Sautrantikas say, this is the ones that they're always refuting, is that not knowing, well, not knowing the jug, not knowing 1 plus 1 is 2, is not knowing. Not knowing is a very large category. And so not knowing 1 plus 1 is 2 doesn't act as an opponent to get rid of, not of, incorrectly knowing the cause of suffering. So that's how they refute, just simply not knowing. It has to be misknowing. So this is the Vaibhashikas. And misknowing the Four Noble Truths, that's only doctrinally based. So they say that unawareness of how the self exists is only doctrinally based. They don't. So that means that you think, we believe incorrectly that there is a self which is, now you have this word permanent, difficult word because permanent has 2 different meanings. Forever, well, the Buddhists say the self exists forever. So that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about, does it change from moment to moment? Is it affected by other things, and does it in turn affect different things? Conditioned phenomenon. Is it conditioned by other things? It means is it affected by something in a causal type of way? So that is, and then there is, anyway, don't want to go into too much information. So they say that the self is static. It's not affected by anything. That's what they mean. And that it is partless. That's what it means when it's one. So, like the example that they use is that there's 2 different systems. Either it is with the Nyayas and Vaisheshikas, it's tiny like a little particle, so it doesn't have any parts, or it's one with the universe. Like they say that if you have a jug, an empty jug, a clay jug, water jug, that's what usually called vase, but not a flower vase. They use that example. It's a clay jug, a water jug, like in India. And in an empty room, and you break the jug, well, that empty space in the jug is one with the empty space. It's not different from the empty space of the whole room. So they use that as the example of the Atman inside a body, that, the body's gone. Well, it's one with the universe. So, I mean, it's not a stupid idea. And then the other characteristic of it is that independent. What that means is that when it attains liberation, it can exist independently of a body and mind. It goes into a body and controls it, and uses it. It's its home and controls it, makes use of it, and leaves. It's not independent in that sense. It's independent when it attains liberation. It doesn't need a body and mind. It can exist without one. So that is, incorrectly knowing the Buddhist view that the self is non-static. It changes from moment to moment. It is has parts because it's on the basis of many parts. I mean, even in our ordinary conversation, there's my business life, there's my sports life, there's my in many ways we consider ourselves different people. I'm a parent. I'm a daughter or a son. I'm a worker. all these sort of things. We have parts, and there's no way, even as a Buddha has aggregates, untainted aggregates, but the aggregates. Tainted in prasangika means with an appearance of self-established existence. Untainted means in total absorption on voidness. Other schools define them differently. We don't have to go into all of that. So anyway, the ignorance is misknowing the Four Noble Truths. And in Vaibhashika, it only accompanies destructive behavior. It doesn't accompany constructive behavior. It's very interesting. And their way of defining the 12 links is totally different from the way that we are studying it. The way that we're learning it is the way that it is asserted, I believe, in the Chittamatra system, and then it is adopted by, with slight changes in terms of how things exist into the Madhyamaka system. But there, it's completely different. Anyway, no need to go into the details on that. When we get to Sautra, and so the ignorance is only about a person, that the person exists with these three characteristics that you had to learn about. So it's doctrinally based. You had to learn one of these non-Buddhist Indian tenet systems and believe it. And Tsongkhapa has this little trick that he says that even if we haven't studied any of that stuff in this lifetime, we've studied it in past lifetimes. So we've all studied it at some point and accepted it. And how do we know that? It's because each of these three characteristics, in some level, we can have in what's called, it was mentioned in the Rinpoche's teachings, discordant taking to mind. That we take things to mind as, even though it is non-static, we take it as being static. Even though it is not clean, we take it to be clean. Even though it is not self, we take it to be self. So, so we don't have all of, the three characteristics, the doctrinally based, together as a package, but we have leftovers of it in our incorrect consideration, how we incorrectly consider things. That's where it comes, that we can tell that we have that. So now, Svatantrika, Sautrantika, adds, only in terms of ignorance about how the self, how do you establish that the self exists? And for Vaibhashika and Sautrantika, it's because it functions, because I see things, I do things. That's how you establish is that it exists. But, what are its characteristics? That it is non-static, it has parts, and it can't exist independently of a basis. Aggregates. So now, what's added is that it can't be known separately from the basis. That's the subtle selflessness of a person. Can't be known. First you have to know the basis, and then you know it together with the basis. So that's automatically arising. Automatically arising because automatically when we hear somebody's voice on the phone, we say, I'm speaking to my friend. Automatically. A dog has that automatically. They smell, I'm smelling my master. So this is automatically arising. So that's the ignorance that we're talking about in Sautrantika. So not with regard to all phenomenon. So now, with regard to all phenomenon, you have two sets of obscurations. There are the what I call emotional obscurations and the cognitive obscurations. The emotional ones are the disturbing mental factors, what people translate as afflictions, which sounds like polio or something like that. But anyway, it's a disturbing mental factor, disturbs the mind and makes you lose self-control. It's a definition. So those are the ones that when you gain liberation as an arhat, according to Vaibhashika and Sautrantika, you just get rid of those. And so when you go into Chittamatra and even Svatantrika, they will only include in those obscurations that are preventing liberations, the ones that are the disturbing mental factors, only the ignorance of how the person exists. The ignorance of how all phenomena exist goes into the cognitive obscurations, the ones that prevent omniscience. So they're not included in the 12, that's not included in the 12 links. 12 links is only the voidness of the ignorances of the person. That's why. And Prasangika redefines what's in the two obscurations, so then covers, how the incorrect way in which all phenomenon exist also is included in the emotional obscurations. So Prasangika, gets around it like that. So anyway, the ignorance in the 12 links is only in Chittamatra and in Svatantrika is the same as Sautrantika. It's only, it's both the doctrinally based and the automatically arising ignorance. If you talk about and for Sautrantika and Chittamatra, again, you have to divide those that depend on scriptural authority and those that depend on logic. Those that depend on scriptural authority are referring to the texts of a Sangha, or Dharmakirti, or, a Sangha, basically. And so there, it is not knowing. It's not misknowing, it's not knowing is ignorance. And so they say it comes in two steps. First, you don't know it's dark and you don't know that the snake is a rope, and then, it obscures you knowing that it's not a rope. So first you have the darkness, so the not knowing, you just don't know. So this is when they just refer on to scriptural authority, but if they use logic, then they would get to misknowing, which is the way that Prasangika takes it. If you talk in terms of not knowing, which leads to misknowing, what establishes the existence of something is, you see, the problem was with Sautrantika is that they say that the cause exists externally, the object, and then you see it. So cognition comes afterwards. So now the question is, how do you know that something exists before you see it, or before you think about it, or before, all of that? How do you know that there is food in the refrigerator unless you open the door? You don't know. What establishes that there's food in the refrigerator? So so this is, the problem that the Chittamatras say. They say, well, you can't say that things come from an external source before you see it, and then you see it. How does the I mean, there's all sorts of logical inconsistencies with that. So they say that, well, it's not that the object, when you say mind only, it's not that the object exists in your head in a seed of karma and then pops out. Not at all. Things do arise from the elements and so on. The matter, clay jug rises from clay. But the appearance, when you're talking about the appearance comes from the appearance and the consciousness and the mental factors and the reflexive awareness, which is sort of the recording machine that Sautrantika and Chittamatra assert. All of that comes from one seed. Earlier they said they all come from different ones. All the mental factors come from their seed. Everything comes from its own seed. They make it so that's one level of voidness that they say, and the other level we'll get to, that has to do with this whole thing of conceptual labeling. So let's go back to conceptual labeling. Conceptual labeling, that's, putting things into categories. Basically, let's just take it from the Chittamatra. Start from the Chittamatra point of view. The Chittamatra point of view, they say that I should start from the Sautrantikas. That when you mentally label something, well, actually it gets very complicated if we go to Sautrantika. Sautrantika does not accept that there are forms that arise only to the mind, to the mind. They don't accept that. And so because they don't assert that, they say that when you think of something, let's say I think of my mother, actually what you are, the example that you're thinking of is your actual mother, objective mother. It's not that there's a mental image of your mother. That's because they don't accept that there are these mental images. But when you so they would say that the defining characteristic that things are established because there's a defining characteristic that has their own power to establish it. So there are two levels of that. There's one that establishes that something is a thing, and then something that establishes what it is and its characteristics. So Svatantrika says all of that stuff is on the side of the object. So now you go into the Chittamatra. So this is, in terms of mental labeling. You have to have the basis, and the basis has to have the defining characteristics. So if you understand that, okay, if I think of something that actually I'm thinking of something that is externally existent and it has all the characteristics and stuff like that. Okay, now in Chittamatra, where you do have mental appearances, mental